Are we co-hosts? Are you gonna do the recording?
I don't think.
Hey, I heard you, Carl. Yes, we're going to record. I am recording, and we're live on Facebook. And this is Multifamily Unplugged Saturday morning, your raw, unscripted radio show. Hey, Carl, good morning.
How are you, Mike?
I am great. How are you? Man, you've been
I'm
gone
good.
all week, Carl. What are you up to?
I know I was in Ohio. We have a lake house on Lake Erie, and we were there with the kids. And then my daughter she's in New York City. She's dancing with the Russian ballet for 6 weeks. So yeah, a lot of stuff going on, but it was great.
How cool is that, huh? Dancing with the Russian ballet?
It's pretty cool. She got invited. She's 16 years old, so she's going to be there for 6 weeks in New York City with people. So we're very excited about that. I'm a little concerned, that she's in New York, but the Russians, they're very strict. This woman said, "No, we keep an eye on them." I'm like, okay, good.
Hey, listen, that kind of puts multifamily to shame, Carl, doesn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, dancing with the Russian ballet, nothing like that. Jeez.
Yeah. Well, she handles it pretty well, but she does kind of look at me. She looks down her nose at me once in a while, like, yeah, Dad, whatever.
Yeah. All right. Hey, let's fire this thing up. Hey, it's Saturday morning. Go wake somebody up. I know it's raining. Put on your bathrobe, grab a cup of coffee, kick back. You're here with me and Moose. We're going to talk about multifamily. Our guest must have got hung up. This has happened to us one time before in a year, though. Hey, you know what? Pretty soon we're going to have this in for a year, I think, Carl. We've been doing this. We got to go back and check the date because, we might have an anniversary coming up here, right?
We might have missed it. I mean, we started doing this before the October event last year. So, yeah, we're probably getting pretty close to a year, Mike.
We're going to have
Does
to
it
go
seem
back
like it?
No, God, time goes so fast, doesn't it? Hey, here's what I know, though. You must have drove by every store yesterday on the way home.
Why do you say that?
Because obviously we're out of razor blades.
Oh yeah. No, I trimmed it up.
Did you?
Yeah. I'm like playing with the idea of keeping it. No, it's probably going to go after the show today.
Yeah, you know what? Everybody knows that I just bust your chops on Saturday morning when I have the chance. So
exactly.
Hey, welcome to Saturday morning on Multifamily Unplugged. It's me and Moose. We are live on Facebook and streaming on Zoom. Listen, today we're going to talk about multifamily, but a couple of housekeeping things first. If you know where our guest is, maybe go wake her up, remind her what the link was. And if not, that's okay too. But listen, like us, love us, follow us, subscribe to us, Instagram, Facebook, all the platforms. You know what? Just help us out a little bit and give us some support. We are glad that you're here this morning. Please put in the chat if there's something that you want to talk about, a question that you need answered or want answered. But we're here this morning to, and I think, Carl, I got to tell you that I really think that a conversation or a topic for today has to be around underwriting. The conservativeness of underwriting a deal properly. It just, there's so much volatility, I think, right now in the market. I had an LOI out on a deal, Carl. So here's a story, right? I had an LOI out over the last couple of weeks. We went back and forth a couple of times. Was a 59 unit deal down in Tampa. And, the whole goal was we were going to buy it, go in, put some value add into it, CapEx into it, re-engineer the operations and be out of the thing in about 24, 30 months. And so we went in at 100,000 a door. We got outbid at 115 a door. And the whisper price by the agent was 100 a door. So, it's kind of funny where the market's at right now because people, I think, are overpaying for things. And that's, I see some shades of 2007, 2006. And there's a little bit of a concerning loom in the market. And if anybody saw the news yesterday, the political systems, and I don't go to politics, Carl, we don't talk about politics on Saturday, but listen, they extended again another 30-day extension on the foreclosure forbearance and the eviction forbearance. So that's kind of crazy. I think our guest is here though. Good morning,
Yeah,
Alex.
I think.
Hello, hello.
What's happening?
Oh, we had a storm, pretty good storm here last night, knockout power. We just got power back this morning and our internet came back about 2 hours ago. So we've been trying to reboot everything.
Well, the bridge is lit behind you.
That's New Orleans. That's home.
Oh, is it really? Where are you calling from?
I'm actually in Chesapeake, Virginia now. My spouse is an active duty service member. So we've moved 19 times in 20 years, but that's home.
Good for you and good for him. I'm actually going to be in New Orleans in October, so I'm looking forward to that. It's a great town.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
What are you going to New Orleans for, Carl?
My cousin's daughter is getting married, and so we're going to go down there, and I'm going to spend like 4 or 5 days, meet some friends, and it's going to be a good time.
Well, Alex, hey, it's good that you're here this morning. I'm glad that you showed up. You know, we just went ahead and got started, so we've been running here for a few minutes, wondering what we were going to talk about, and just kind of started to maybe talk about conservative underwriting a little bit. But before we get into that, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us about your background, and thanks for your service. We know your husband's in the military and you move around, but you're probably as big as a hero as he is. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
So, yeah, go ahead.
So I am Alex Breshears. I do private lending. I am an owner and a manager for short-term rentals. And then I'm also in the process of standing up a fund. One is a Regulation A+ fund, and another one is a CF fund for various purposes related to real estate. I run an educational group centered around private lending and passive investing. So we have daily discussions about private lending. We have weekly educational events where maybe we bring on operators to talk about some aspect of syndication, for example. We'll talk to other people about, what conservative underwriting looks like from the lending perspective, as opposed to the active borrower perspective. What does loan processing look like? How can you scale up your lending business? All these various things related to private lending, because there just isn't a lot of educational material around private lending. I mean, you think about something like Bigger Pockets, a fantastic, valuable forum for a lot of investing information. They have books, how to price out your scope of work and how to buy an apartment building in 30 days. But anytime private lending's mentioned, it's go find a private lender to fund your deals. And that leaves the other side of the table like, okay, how do we do that? We're willing to do that, but how do we do that? So the group was really started with the intention of having education and networking opportunities.
Yeah, very cool. Good for you. Hey, listen, can we do this? Because a lot of our listeners are a little bit on the newer side. Can we go back and talk about the numbers that you talked about around the securities regulation stuff in the beginning and explain what those are?
So there are multiple ways, thanks to the Jobs Act of 2012, that you can actually raise capital legally from various types of investors. One of them is called Regulation A+, and that is where you can advertise publicly. You can actually raise up to $75 million per fund. It's very expensive to get going. You have to be approved by the SEC, full audited financials. It's a major undertaking, but potentially it's the highest limit. There's Regulation D, which is also part of the Jobs Act. Regulation D, most people will associate that with multifamily syndication. So if you ever hear 506B or 506C, that is actually part of Regulation D of the Jobs Act. Again, those are vehicles for pooling capital from multiple investors. The nice thing about Regulation D is you do not have to go through the massive extensive process you do with Regulation A, because it is not that fully, qualified as Regulation A is. Underneath Regulation D, 506B, 506C, you're technically allowed to raise an unlimited amount of capital. The sticking points with those tend to be the number of what's called unsophisticated investors. So 506B can include up to 35 unsophisticated investors. 506C can have only what they call accredited investors, which are people that have $1 million net worth excluding their primary residence, or there's some income thresholds depending on whether you're single or married. So that's the first kind of two is Regulation D, and then there's Regulation A+. And then the last one I mentioned is going to be, it's called Title III crowdfunding, or it's often called CF, just crowdfunding. And that one allows you to raise up to $5 million. So you don't have to do it all in one raise. You could do it in multiple raises. But that one tends to be kind of the easier if you're looking at the fund model, but it has a lot of drawbacks that make it a little bit problematic for real estate as a whole. It's another tool in the tool belt, but you can advertise publicly with some limitations. Like I said, you can raise up to $5 million, but it's kind of a nifty little tool. It's like having that specialty, 5-star screwdriver in your toolkit. When you really need it, it's not going to be something you use every day, but when you really need it, it comes in handy.
Yeah, what a great way to put that, right? So, the world is interesting. I remember, I'd syndicated a lot of deals a number of years ago, and it was shortly after I unwound all those deals or got rid of all those deals that crowdfunding started. And I found it amazing that we went from this space where you really couldn't talk about what you were doing. You couldn't go tell somebody. I had to know you for a period of time and then tell you what I was doing, and then not talk to you for 30 days or 3 weeks or whatever it was, that cooling off period before I could come back and see if you were still interested. So it's funny. I remember the first time somebody said, "Hey, did you hear about this new crowdfunding thing?" I go, "No, you're crazy. People can't do that. That's illegal." But now, when you look at all the advertising and the way people use social media around this today, it's interesting. And I think, and you tell me, do you think that it's made it easier or more difficult for you as an operator, as a syndicator, to raise money today because of that?
I would say it's probably made it easier because it is more visible, but I would say what the difficulty is with that entire process is that I feel like it makes it more confusing, and it makes it so there's kind of this level of success, this ladder of success that's kind of viewed. So, what I see commonly with operators now is they'll say, "Oh, I'm going to start out with doing like a 506B. And then I'm going to graduate to being, just accredited investors, 506C, so I can advertise publicly." And then they'll go, "Okay, and then I'm going to put together a fund," because they kind of view, if you are, big enough and bold enough to do a fund that, you've reached it, that's the pinnacle. So I view it more as each particular instrument has a purpose, just like each tool in your toolbox has a purpose. So it really depends on what you're trying to get that tool to do. Like, am I going to use the hammer to change out a light switch? No, but that doesn't mean my hammer doesn't have value.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Mike, because I remember the days, back in the 80s and 90s, because we're that old. But you had to be really, really careful. I mean, I remember when crowdfunding came about, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And there's the old saying, right? Smart money and dumb money. You know what I mean? I always look for investors, and every deal we did, and I didn't do anywhere near as many deals as Mike did, but I think we did 22 or 25. I can't remember. Multifamily. I always wanted. I never had more than, besides myself as the managing member or limited partner, or I'm sorry, the managing partner. I never wanted more than 2 people, 2 entities or 2 people in any one of my deals. And now, granted, these were smaller deals. I mean, the biggest deal we did was, 35 or 40 units. So, they weren't huge deals. However, just from managing the personalities, And this idea of going out and having, even 30, for Reg D, because we filed all the exemptions and all that kind of stuff, but even having 30 unsophisticated, I mean, just the term unsophisticated investor, it's just like, oh my God, and even so, managing our investors just when the K1s had to come through and, if we had a capital call, which we never did, but you know what I'm saying? It was just, you had to deal with all these people, but yeah, it's a different world than it was way back when, and that's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about from that perspective, a fund, you might have a couple thousand to 10,000, depending on what your minimum is and what your raise is. If your minimum's 500 and you want to raise that 75 million, that's a lot of potential investors that you're going to have to deal with. It becomes a very extensive cap table. So, fund administration is probably something else that you're going to want to throw into your expenses if you're doing something like a Regulation A that's going to have thousands of passive investors in your fund. So absolutely, it's a consideration to make. Like I said, you're not gonna use a hammer to change out the light switch, but that doesn't mean the hammer is not valuable.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put that, actually. Hey, Alex, what are you working on these days as far as, acquisition? And really, even more than that, what I'd really like you to talk about is what's your model? What bucket do you play in most?
I would say split the time fairly evenly between private lending and actually short-term rentals or small boutique hotels is what we're currently pursuing. We have done, my spouse and I, being a military family, kind of the military mantra of real estate investing when you get started is, go buy a house with your VA loan. And then when you get transferred to another duty station, rent it out. And we did that and it had disastrous results. We are just not long-term rental owners. We don't enjoy it. It doesn't fit our skill set. And lastly, it doesn't fit our goals. And we never had that conversation with ourselves early on in our investing journey. We just saw that's kind of what the newbies are presented with. You're either going to be a landlord or you're going to do fix and flips like they do on HGTV. And only after you've kind of been through that real estate hazing, as I call it, do the doors open and you see this wide world of the other options that are available to invest in real estate, like syndications, for example. So we did a fix and flip. We did a long-term rental. Neither one fit our personalities, fit our goals, fit our criteria. So just kind of over the years, the constant moving that takes us away from what most people would consider active investing. If you're only going to live somewhere for 3 months and that place happens to have more bears than people, you're not going to be an active real estate investor in that market. If you live somewhere for 9 months and the median household price for a home, a small home, starts at $800,000, that's not going to be our market either. So when we are forced to live places that aren't necessarily good markets for what we're trying to accomplish in our lifestyle, you have to get creative. And so when we finally came to Virginia, we knew we were going to spend a little bit of time here. My spouse is in the Navy and the largest Navy base in the world is here. So we thought, okay, we'll be able to stay here for a little while. The Navy has other ideas. He's actually leaving for Italy very soon.
Are you in Newport Richey? Is that where you are?
No, I'm actually in Hampton Roads.
Okay.
And
so he's going to Italy.
He's moving to Italy. I am not moving to Italy.
What does he do in the service?
He's currently a meteorology and oceanography officer. So he's done everything from like tracking the hurricanes when we lived down in Florida. He was on a lot of the first responder ships to the Caribbean islands when, they said, okay, the ship can go here and he can go here and this can go here. So he's done a wide variety of very interesting jobs for the Navy, but he's going over to Italy to be a meteorology officer for an admiral over there.
Okay.
So can we talk a little bit about the boutique hotel? Because years ago, I looked into that in Chicago. There's on the north side of Chicago, there's not a lot of hotels, or at least at that time there weren't, by the Cubs, park. And I know, Mike, you're a Sox guy. I know that, but I'm just talking about real estate here. So don't get on your baseball bandwagon. But,
love you, Carl.
And there were like 3 or 4 boutique hotels on the north side. And we were looking, 3 of them were owned by a group in Texas, and then there was one independent. So my wife at the time and I, who was my partner, we started looking at the boutique hotel business because we liked it. These were relatively small properties. There was a high demand for the rooms, especially during the summer. This was before Airbnb really started to take off. And what we found was much like the self-storage segment of the market, it's very niche. In other words, you really have to know what you're doing. And all these operators, they kind of knew each other. We went to a couple of conferences. We actually put a bid in on the 3-unit or the 3 buildings for this person that was retiring in Texas. And we found that we're like, wow, this is really specialized, and you really have to know what you're doing. So I'm curious about, how you got into that and, where you are with that. Because I think there might be some interesting information for our listeners.
So we got into the kind of the short-term stay space we started with single family homes for short-term rentals. And it fit our lifestyle a lot more because we as owners can use the property. We can wherever we happen to travel around. We have a vacation home. We actually bought them as second homes as long as they're 100 miles from each other. You can have as many second homes as you want. So that's kind of what started it. And then now we're pursuing the boutique hotel, basically to run them, almost think of like the multifamily advantages of having scale, but they're going to be run as Airbnbs. So we want to do something that's more kind of like cottage, almost like not like what you would think a traditional motel with like multiple levels and all the doors are on the outside. We want to have something that's a little more like cottage, little cabin, something like that. That's going to be a little more specialized. Again, they want an experience. Short-term stay guests want an experience. So they don't want to come into 4 beige walls and beige carpet that, a lot of the long-term rental owners, that's what they're going to put because they want everything to be neutral. Whereas I would love a boutique hotel that was decked out to look like Jurassic Park. Like, let's paint velociraptors on the walls and let's do this, because when it comes to short-term rental guests, what they are doing is they are buying the photos on the platform and showing up for the experience. So you don't want to do the beige walls and the gray walls. Like, you want it to be just like something that they are going to take a picture of and put it on Instagram or put it on Facebook and be like, look at this awesome place. There's a velociraptor in my kid's bedroom, whatever it happens to be, because they want a fun story to go back and tell their coworkers when they go back to work in the office, be like, look at this place we stayed at, because that makes them feel good. So I would say whatever you're looking at for the boutique hotel, having some sort of theme, I think, is crucial. And that's true for the single family space as well.
So in the boutique hotel space, how is the underwriting different than or similar to underwriting a multifamily deal?
The boutique hotel model, it's going to sound really strange, but your goal isn't necessarily 100% occupancy. And people kind of do a double take. They're like, wait, what? Because if you're 100% occupied, all your units are 100% occupied, that means your prices are too low. And also, you need a little bit of downtime for those units to be freshened up, to have servicing done to them. So the ideal goal is not to have 100% occupancy. So you want to live in this sweet spot where you have maybe 65 to 75% occupancy. Maybe it's 80 and 90 during those really, really peak seasons, depending on where the property is located. But you want to adjust the pricing where you are ending up with that kind of ideal occupancy versus just trying to cram as many bodies into the properties as possible. That causes more wear and tear. The lower prices tend to attract guests that aren't going to respect the property. So if you're the cheapest place in town, you're going to attract the cheapest guests in town, and they tend to not take care of the property.
Can I just make a comment on that? Because Mike, you bring up a really good point, because I know you're the master of underwriting. But when I used to be a banker, Alex, we had our certain ratios and everything else, and exactly to that point, I would tell people, if you're over 92% occupied, your rents are probably too low. You know what I mean? And not so much for a multifamily. The maintenance is important, and going in and freshening up and painting and tightening up the plumbing and all that. Absolutely. But I really want the listeners to get what Alex just said here. She's, because she's talking about a niche, the short-term rental boutique hotel experience. The underwriting criteria is going to shift, right? So what you just said makes total sense to me, and I'm sure it makes sense to Mike as well. So, you're looking for a little bit higher occupant or vacancy rate, right? than if you were just looking at a straight multifamily, because, you are competing with other experiences, short-term rental for experience, and people are going to pay, those people that pay a little bit more, you're going to, for lack of a better term, you're going to get rid of some of the riffraff, and that's probably not a good term to use, but you know what I mean. Some of the people that aren't willing to pay for the quality, right? And that's going to make a difference when you're looking at buying a property. It's going to make a difference when you're looking at finance a property, because if the other person that you're either getting money from, whether it's a bank or private lender or whoever, if they don't understand that, they might get confused by that and say, whoa, hold on a minute, your underwriting is, we're not going to make our returns because you're vacant, your vacancy rate's really high. So I want my listener or our listeners to really understand what Alex is saying here, because it's specific to her type of property, and she obviously really knows what she's doing on this. And back to your point, Mike, underwriting is the key, because you want to know what you're doing when you're underwriting your deals.
So let me just jump in here really quick. And it's funny. Here's what I always say about Saturday morning, Moose, is that we never know where we're going to end up. And this whole conversation about boutique hotels right now is so timely. I have been looking, and, we live in Chicago, Alex. So in Chicago, there's all kinds of these old, we used to call them roach houses, right? Because they're run down, beat up. Matter of fact, I live on the west side, and right down the block, 3 blocks from where I live, I just got the tax information on an old rundown boutique hotel that I want to reach out this week and try and get a hold of the owner. It looks like it's run by a small hedge fund or something, but it's a dump, and I'd love to buy the thing. And I think that, what about marketing, Alex? I mean, when you take an old boutique hotel, you create an experience, and then you market, there's plenty of opportunity with people in the music industry, artists, people that come in town, short-term nurses, all that. Do you do anything special around that type of marketing, or who you promote your product to?
Yes. So there's a couple things. So with the underwriting, we'll finish the underwriting conversation. And then, so the underwriting conversation, the other big difference I would say is the expenses can be totally different. So a lot of times in the multifamily long-term rental space, they're talking about, oh, we're going to go in and we're going to do a hard turn. It's going to be $8,000 for new appliances, paint, carpet, whatever they're putting in there. Whereas your expenses are going to be higher on a per unit basis, because you have to go in there and provide all the furniture, the dishes, the appliances, and it needs to look nice. I mean, it's Airbnb and VRBO and those platforms have grown where the expectation of the traveler has also grown. So it's not going to be something where, if you have these, 6 cottages, you're not going to go wandering around at garage sales and Goodwill and, throw secondhand furniture in there and do well. You really have to have something. I kind of call it layers, like Walmart, Target, Macy's, and then like high end, Nordstrom type of levels. You want to be somewhere between like Target and Macy's. You want something that looks nice, something that's sturdy. So the underwriting, when you're underwriting these types of properties, there's going to be increased expenses that literally don't exist in the long-term rental space. And any of your renovation costs tend to be a little bit higher, because you're going to want to put the nicer fixtures, the nicer amenities. So if you are doing hard turns on those units, it's going to be more expensive than what you're traditionally doing. Also, potentially adding amenities that you wouldn't think in a million years to add to a long-term rental, things like hot tubs or swim spas or swings, porch swings, things that normally are considered kind of a liability in long-term rental space is an asset in a short-term rental space. So again, that adds to that underwriting difference there. Now, as far as the marketing goes, in my opinion, you really have to know what guest you're targeting and then go find the property. Because if you do it the other way around and you just find a property and you're like, yeah, this is awesome, your target market might not want to go there. They might not physically want to go to that area. So like, for example, don't go and have a beach themed house when you're up in the mountains. That just, people aren't going to want to go to the mountains and stare at fish on the walls. That's not why they go to the mountains. So your target market. So if you're going into this going, I want to have, musicians. I want to have big, famous, rich people stay in this property for whatever reason. That's your target market because it's a big city, lots of concerts, lots of events. Then you need to target that property, make the finishes really nice, make the finishes so there's a grand loft presidential suite, all those niceties that are going to attract that market. Versus if you're going into that property going, oh, I just want a nice place for families to stay, go to the ball game, make those memories. That's going to be a different configuration for rooms and finishes than someone who's marketing towards, someone high end to stay in that property. So I'm one of those people, figure out who your guest is and then go shopping for properties for that type of guest versus the other way around.
Hey, Carl, do you remember a place in the city called the Whitehall? It
Yeah.
was, I want to say it was on Walton. It was a block off of Oak Street by Rush Street. And the
Yeah.
Rolling Stones used to stay there all the time. Billy Joel stayed there. Anybody who came into town who was, in the music industry, you could always see somebody in and out of there who was I remember Eric Clapton stayed there. It was always an interesting place, but that was like one of the first boutique kind of hotels, right? That I remember growing up from a long time ago. But now there's all these rundown places. So how do you find them? So what do you do to go source them?
It's really, honestly, we've gone through a lot of searches through MLS because we are looking in kind of what you would consider tertiary or even quaternary markets because we want vacation destinations. Again, that's the guest we are going after is we want families that want to get away. And we chose that because we are a family that wants to get away. So we know those people, I'm quite happy if I can't see my neighbor's house from my house. I'm one of those people. So I want to cater to those types of guests. I have 5 dogs, so we make our properties pet friendly. So we do some tweaks to the property, solid surface flooring, everything can be bleached, everything can be cleaned. We provide beds and kennels and all of this. So as far as locating the properties, MLS really has been kind of the best go-to. Just somebody has a property, it might be in this little rundown, area, some little mountain town or something. But if we can go in there and take it over and turn it into what I call a destination property, somebody's going to go to that property specifically for that property, then, the area around it isn't necessarily as important. Obviously, you don't want it next door to like a crack hotel or anything, but location is still a factor. But as far as the market itself, again, depending on what your guest is, our guests are people and families that want to get away with their pets. That's who.
Hey, Alex, even next to a crack house, it could be an experience.
Not the kind people want to pay for. I don't think they want to be on cops.
Yeah. It's so funny. I just drove from Chicago to Ohio and we go by a place called Yogi Bear's Park, right? And it's on this lake. And I joke with my kids all the time because I go, hey, yo, boo boo, let's go to Yogi Bear's, for a picnic, and they crack up. And we drove by there, and it's awesome. I mean, it's all these cabins, and there's a lake, and they have a little restaurant, and it's like in the middle of Indiana, and it's a destination. They have boats you can rent, you can go fishing if you want, you go water skiing, I mean it's. And they have little cabins, they're just like little cabins, full of spiders. And then they have the more deluxe stuff, you know what I mean? And it's an awesome little place, but it's in the middle of nowhere. It's like between Elkhart, Indiana and Mishawaka or something, you know what I mean? So,
I mean, like the most recent short-term rental we just closed on, that one, we got the seller to pay all the closing costs. They did about $5,000 worth of repairs that we requested. So literally when we bought the home, all we paid for was our 10% down. The house had been on the market for 45 days. And now we net about 1% of our purchase price every single month after routine expenses on this little house. It just happened to be, quirky and fun. And that's, it sat on the market a while because it was kind of quirky and fun. And we're like, this is exactly what I want. It's quirky, it's fun, it's unusual, and it's not beige. That's my criteria.
How about price point, Alex? What do you, I'm sure it's market sensitive, but what are you looking at price point wise?
I would say not so much price point wise, because that can really vary from market to market, but I'll tell you something's probably a little more valuable is I'm looking for something. The long-term rental space has the 1% rule, right? So they want rents that are on a monthly basis about 1% of the purchase price. That's, kind of the baseline. If it meets that criteria, we'll dive in forwards. That doesn't necessarily mean we'll buy the property, but it warrants further, investigation. For me, on the short-term rental side, I want the 0.1% rule. So I want the nightly rate to be about 0.1% of the purchase price. So for the home we just closed on a couple months ago, the purchase price was $230. So I want the nightly rate to be $230, on an average throughout the entire year. Obviously, like weekends are going to be higher, middle of the week's going to be lower. This particular market, the summer is very, very peak. Has a pretty long, goes into the fall, see the colors change kind of season. And then an off-peak season tends to be November, January, and February. And then we just kind of, roll right back into the spring. So overall, over the course of the year, I would like the average nightly rate to be at least 0.1% of the purchase price. And the other thing I kind of look at, once I kind of feel like it meets that metric, the second investigation I look at is I kind of look at it as almost like the DSCR, since your listeners are more familiar with long-term multifamily. So
Yep.
basically the debt coverage, what occupancy, for example, do you need to have to cover your debt? And that's how I look at it, is how many nights does this property need to be occupied in order to basically break even? What's my break even analysis? So for smaller single family properties or smaller, 2, 3 unit, 4 unit properties, I want that number to be 7 to 10 days a month. So if the property can be totally paid for, all the expenses, utilities, cable, lawn service, landscaping, if there's maintenance for pools or hot tubs, I want all of that to be covered in 7 to 10 nights a month. And then everything else above that starts to be my return of capital for obviously the expenses of furnishings, supplies, things like that, and then return on capital to a certain degree.
So can I just jump in for a second? I really want our listeners to get this, and then I want to ask you a question. For those of you listening, you can tell Alex is not doing this as a hobby. This is a business for her. Oh, seriously. I mean, your metrics, right? You know what you're up to, right? I mean, we could probably dive deep for hours talking to you about this business. And the point I want to make here is for listeners, this is a business. Multifamily investing is a business. And if you approach it from that perspective and you educate yourself and you surround yourself with people that are just like if you were starting a coffee shop or, a auto mechanic, garage service or whatever, you want to tap into the resources. You want to surround yourself with people who know what they're doing. And you really want to dive deep and educate yourself and know the business, because clearly Alex does. So that leads me into my question, Alex. Like, what is your background? I'm just curious. I know your husband, you said your husband's in the military, but I mean, you strike me as somebody that's very, you want to know what you're doing. And again, I could be totally off base, but obviously you have some degree of an analyst in you. So I'm just curious about what your background is and how you got, because honestly, if I was investing, if I had money that I wanted to put into the short-term rental space, you'd be the first person I'd call. I mean, I'd call you and say, what do you got going? Because clearly you know what you're doing. So how did you get there? I mean, what's your background?
That's exactly why we decided to open up to co-hosting, to managing other people's properties, because we had so many people we were talking to, realtors, for example. One of our realtors that we frequently go to, we were talking to them about our metrics, and she happened to own 2 short-term rentals in this same market. And she's like, I'm using another company and they don't talk to me about any of these things, and none of these things that you say should be happening are happening. And I'm like, okay, well, this is what we'll do, And so we set it up where we could do managing other people's properties, because selfishly, I will say my metrics, people ask, how do you come up with that? My metrics come from, I want to use the property. So if one of the properties happens to be vacant for the weekend and my spouse and I don't want to stay home, it's our house. We can pack up our 5 dogs, drive the 6 hours to our mountain house, go spend the weekend there, clean it up, leave, so if we had a really high, nightly coverage, if we had to have the property occupied 60 to 70% of the time just to break even, we don't get to use it. So that's kind of how I developed the metrics. Was selfishly, I want to use my own property. I want to be there. But my background, to the second question, my background is I'm actually a chemistry professor. I used to run a research lab for a college in Florida. I still teach for them online. And my background is in organic synthesis for the pharmacy industry. So helping develop drugs, new novel drugs, testing efficacy of drugs, things like that.
Well, that kind
Interesting.
of brings a whole new twist to, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to do multifamily. Hey, one thing I always say though is, when we bring a guest on, we always want to bring somebody on who knows more than we do. And, between Carl and I, we have 50 years of experience in this space, right? So to bring somebody on that we can learn from, or that our guests can learn from, is just always such an, it's like a blessing for everybody, right? Because there's just so much knowledge there. And I appreciate that about you today. I had heard you originally on, I think, Kent Ritter's show. Or Kent Ritter's podcast. And God, you and I connected months ago. I mean, it's like, wow, finally this episode is coming up. And I had no idea we were going to talk about this boutique deal, but I am really like, you're going to hear from me for sure. I'm going to find a deal and call Alex and say, hey, how do I underwrite this? So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and it's great because and Mike and I have talked about this before. I mean, one of the things that we both love about commercial, and commercial, a lot of times people think commercial, oh, it's an industrial building or a factory. Commercial in my world is anything over a 4 flat, right? And so there's just so many points of entry. There's so many different ways to get into this business. From the traditional way of I have a bunch of money, I'm going to go buy a property and rent it out, to I'm a bird dog. I'm going to find deals for people because I don't have a lot of money or I don't have a lot of experience, but I'm going to bring something else of value to the table. I mean, and it's perfect with you and your realtor. You're having a conversation probably, and your realtor's going, wow, and now all of a sudden now you've got a property management relationship, and I know, Mike, I know the thousands of units that you own, there's a percentage of those that you manage for other people as well. So there's just so many ways in the commercial real estate world to get involved. And it's not always that traditional way of, hey, I've got, this chunk of money sitting in my 401k and I want to go buy a 4 flat or a 6 flat or whatever, so it's as Mike says, it's always great to have guests that know more than we do in a particular space and can really bring some value to our listeners. So yeah.
I also think
great.
There's a lot more flexibility as far as the property goes. So in the commercial space. So for example, a friend of mine, a colleague in the short-term rental space, he bought an old bank and he turned that into a short-term rental. So one of the bedrooms is actually the vault. So you can sleep in the vault. They have the teller window, you can sleep in the teller window, and he's got all these like old time, cash counting machines, as artwork, on the shelves in the rooms and things like that. So he actually bought this very old timey bank. Very similar story what Mike was talking about, rundown, not used, been vacant for years. And then he comes by as the only buyer. Of course, they're going to work with you to on terms, whatever it is. So he actually ended up getting owner financing for the deal because it had been sitting there for so long. And he went and turned it into an Airbnb. And so it's this really cute old bank. You actually check in behind the bars, of the cash cage and all of this. And it's just this super quirky little place that he's like, this would make a great Airbnb. And it had been a bank for 80 years.
Carl, what that reminds me of is we really got, Carl, I think you and I this morning have just become a buyer for a boutique hotel or an old firehouse, right? And I drove one the other day that was boarded up and I was like, wow, I wonder if that's for sale and can we go buy that? So I think an old firehouse in the city here, and one of those old 1-truck firehouses, even in a rough neighborhood, would be a decent Airbnb.
My buddy, a friend of mine, bought one of those, and he turned it into his house. And you ready for this, Mike? On Halstead, and Alex, you don't know this, but Halstead's a pretty large street. there just in Lincoln Park, there's an old police station that I looked at years ago. And in the basement is the cell where when they arrested Dillinger, that he was in the cell in the basement. And I almost bought that building, but they wanted way too much money for it.
Yeah.
But it's right there, just between Armitage and Webster, on the west side of Halstead. And it's Chicago Police Department, 1882 or something like that. I mean, that would be, and there's a lot of those out there, Mike. They're
Right.
just sitting there. Those would be great for what Alex just described.
So
Yeah.
here's what I say: anybody who's listening in to this episode or seeing this on Facebook later, if you are a broker in Chicago and you can come up with a boutique hotel or an old firehouse, make sure you get a hold of Carl or myself. Hey,
Or
we're
police
getting about to
station.
Oh,
A firehouse or police station.
Okay, there you go. Hey, we're getting close to the end. Alex, thanks for being here today. It really was great. You're a wealth of knowledge and information. How do people get a hold of you if they want to call you, pick your brain, chase you around the world, or find out what you're doing?
Absolutely. So there's a couple ways. I'm on LinkedIn. So it's Alex Breshears on LinkedIn is my name. My URL is invest passively to live actively, because that's my personal mantra. And then the education group I was talking about earlier at the very beginning is called Private Lending Lessons, and that's on Facebook. So anybody can feel free to join that group. We post in that group daily, lots of networking, educational events in that one. So feel free to shoot me a message on LinkedIn or Facebook, and I'm happy to set up a time to talk to people, because I think this is a really unique space to be in, and it's a really unique time to be in it.
Hey, Alex, we had Savannah Arroyo on the show a month or so ago, and her tagline is the net worth nurse. I love these taglines that people have, so say yours again, if you would.
Mine is I invest passively to live actively.
I think that what a mantra, right? What a way to live your life. And, I talked about this just last week. I did a boot camp, and it was a full day boot camp. And if anybody didn't get a chance to go to it, direct message me. We'll figure out how to get you the recording. But at the boot camp, I talk about this quote. Gary Keller wrote a book years ago called The Millionaire Real Estate Investor. Personally, I think one of the best books out there. But he says in the book that that financial freedom is the ability to live your life the way you want to live your life. And, that's the same thing you're saying, right? So I just think it's so critical that we have the opportunity to do that. And I think that multifamily, I think real estate gives people the opportunity to do that. So I want to thank you for being here this morning.
Yes,
Yeah, for sure, Alex. Thank you so much for adding to the conversation. And best of luck to you. Again, thank you for your service, your and your husband's service to our country. That's so important. And just keep up the great work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. I had a great time talking.
Yeah. Hey, what are you doing this weekend, Alex?
No, we are actually preparing for purchasing another property. So we have a couple underwriting meetings with our business managers, other business partners. And then we're going to the Peach Festival, because it is finally time to get back with people. Me being an extrovert stuck inside like for the last year has been killing me. So we missed a lot of the normal events that we like to do in our area. So we're going out to the Peach Festival because peaches are in season here.
Yeah.
Well, eat
cool.
a peach. Eat a peach, like the Allman Brothers say.
Right.
Love that album. That was the best album ever.
It was a good album.
Yeah, one of the best albums ever. Especially if you're an old rock and roller like us. Hey, Carl, how about you? What are you doing this weekend?
I am just hanging out with my 14-year-old son. We're gonna go get some hockey equipment, and then probably go play baseball. And then tomorrow, a couple business partners of mine are having a picnic at their house, so we're gonna go up there and just talk golf. They're big golfers, so we're going to talk about golf.
Nice. Good for you guys.
How about you, Mike?
Oh, thanks. I saw my daughter this morning. Hopefully it won't rain tomorrow and she'll be able to get her softball game in. They're in the playoffs right now, so we might do that. Tonight or later this afternoon, I'm going with a business partner out to look at a 42 unit deal in Mount Prospect. So,
Nice.
Nice.
yeah, I got an LOI out on a deal and we're just trying to figure out if we should pull the trigger the rest of the way. So take the safety off,
Right.
So, well, listen, hey, as usual, it was a great Saturday morning, great information. Alex, thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate you and all your knowledge. Carl, thanks for being here. It's always a pleasure. And we look forward to talking to you guys soon.
Thank you. Mm.